This is Brad Keithley, Managing Director of Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Welcome to the weekly Top 3, the top 3 things on our mind here at Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets for the week of March 9th, 2026. The weekly Top 3 is a regular segment on The Michael Dukes Show. The show broadcasts on both Facebook Live and YouTube Live, as well as via streaming audio from the show's website, weekdays from 6 to 8 a.m. I join Michael weekly in the first hour of Tuesday's show from 6:10 to 7 a.m. for a discussion between the two of us about our 3 issues. We post the podcast of our discussion following the show on the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets Facebook, YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, and Substack pages, also on the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets website, as well as the project's page on national blog site, medium.com. You can find past episodes of the weekly Top 3 also at the same locations. Keep in mind that in addition to these podcasts, during the week, you can also follow and participate in the discussion with us of these and other issues affecting Alaska's fiscal and economic condition by following us on the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets Facebook page and through our posts on Twitter. This week, our top 3 issues are these. First, we explain how SB 274, the Senate Finance Committee's proposal to reduce the level of the annual POMV draw from the permanent fund, is applying the wrong lesson taken from the performance of the Permanent Fund Corporation. Second, we discuss whether the dynamics behind the Alaska LNG project have changed as a result of the effects of the military operation in Iran. And third, we explain why the legislature should ignore the oil price derived from the spring revenue forecast when setting the FY27 budget and instead use the rolling 10-year average price. And now, let's join Michael.
Let's start off with the bill that probably most people have never heard of right now, SB 274. You've got some thoughts on this. Let's dive into this. About how this, on the surface, this sounds great because we're talking about reducing the draw on the permanent fund. And boy, this sounds like a great idea. But you say that there are some challenges to that. Let's get in it.
So SB 274 is a bill introduced by the Senate Finance Committee, and which means it's basically Burt and Lyman, Donnie maybe. And the bill is a proposal to step down the POMV draw, which is currently at 5%, the statutory POMV draw, step it down from 5% in the following manner over a period of 5 years to step it down to 4.5%. So beginning in FY28 or FY29 rather, step it down to 4.9%. 4.8% in FY30, 4.7% in FY31, 4.6% in FY32, and then 4.5% by FY33, and to bring it down to 4.5%. Now, as we've talked on the show innumerable times, more times than probably certainly the Permanent Fund Corporation Board wants to hear, but more times than maybe even listeners want to hear. We've talked about how the Permanent Fund Corporation's performance has not been equal to 5%, and that we're setting up a situation where first we're drawing down the earnings reserve by taking it 5% when the Permanent Fund Corporation is not earning at 5%, and then potentially either draining the earnings reserve by doing that, or if we pass the constitutional amendment that we've talked about a lot of times on the show to merge the 2-account system into the 1-account system, potentially set up a situation in which we would start to eat away at the corpus of the permanent fund. And so when you talk about reducing the draw on the permanent fund, at first blush, you would think that, okay, this would be a great thing, because now we're getting the permanent fund, the POMV draw, more aligned with what the Permanent Fund Corporation has been earning and is projected to earn, itself projects to earn over the coming years. And so we avoid a situation in which we're draining down the ERA or setting up a situation if we have a constitutional amendment of eating into the permanent fund corpus. Here's the problem. The problem I see with that. We're institutionalizing by doing this, by reducing the POMV draw. And this isn't, I mean, people will tell you, Bert would probably say, well, this is a cap. This is, you can draw up to, 5%, 4.9, 4.8, 4.7, 4.6, 4.5. You draw up to that. But it's not really, I mean, what they're really setting up is that sort of draw. And it's institutionalizing, in my view, and I'll write more about this on Friday, but it's institutionalizing the failure of the Permanent Fund Corporation. What you're essentially saying, what this bill essentially says is, yeah, okay, we recognize the Permanent Fund Corporation isn't going to be able to live up to the 5%, and that's a problem, and that we need to correct that problem. And it says we're going to correct that problem by reducing the POMV draw down to what the Permanent Fund Corporation can do. And so you're institutionalizing what I think is the failure of the Permanent Fund Corporation to maximize its returns. You're saying, okay, the Permanent Fund Corporation can't do this over the long term, so we're going to lower the rate of the POMV draw down to the level at which the Permanent Fund Corporation, we think the Permanent Fund Corporation is going to perform. You're eliminating the incentive. I mean, the Permanent Fund Corporation say, well, we still have the incentive to earn more, but you're really eliminating the Permanent Fund Corporation's incentive to strive to produce more than whatever this return is, because at this return, they achieve their goal of producing enough revenue on a consistent basis for the legislature to spend, for the legislature to take in the POMV draw. And they're sort of done. We've done our job is what they can say at this point. I think a much better approach is the approach that Bruce Tangeman first recommended. You need to give him credit, and that we've talked about on the show for the last few weeks, which is to say that the permanent fund draw, the POMV draw, will be the lesser of 5% or what the Permanent Fund Corporation in fact has earned over the 5-year period that you're using as a basis for the draw. So that if over the 5-year period you only earn 4.2%, then what you can draw is 4.2%. If, as they've done in prior 5-year periods, you earn only 3% or 2%, then that's all you can draw. So you're not draining out the ERA, or you're not invading the permanent fund corpus. But I think that we ought to keep the 5% cap, or maybe even a higher cap. We ought to keep a cap that is if you earn more, then the POMV draw is more, up to whatever that cap is. And that would create an incentive, create pressure, and through pressure and incentive on the Permanent Fund Corporation to stay alert to and to focus on, and would create pressure on the legislature to focus the Permanent Fund Corporation on producing higher returns. Because with higher returns, you'd have higher draws, and with higher draws, you would have a better situation for the Alaska economy. So I think what we're doing here with this bill is good in an initial sense of we are realigning the POMV draw, the POMV percentage, to what the Permanent Fund Corporation has been doing and is projected to continue to do. But I think that that when you sort of get through that and think about what that's doing to incentives, it is reducing the incentive on the Permanent Fund Corporation to press forward for higher returns. And we know by looking at the Buffett rule, the 90-10 rule, or looking even at the Permanent Fund Corporation's own passive index, we know there are higher returns out there the Permanent Fund Corporation could be achieving. And so by passing this bill and sort of capping the level of the POMV draw, we're sort of letting the Permanent Fund Corporation off the hook from having the incentive to go out and produce those chase those additional returns, achieve those additional returns that we know they can achieve.
It's interesting because I think Rob Myers kind of summates what you're saying here in the chat room. He says they're still trying to protect the spend by making it smoother from year to year rather than making it healthier for the fund. And I mean, I think that's in part for sure. And quite honestly, I question the genuine nature of what Stedman is saying here. Oh, this will act like a cap. Well, until it doesn't, right? Until they have to take more than 5, because again, this will be statutory. This is not the constitutional component. This is a statutory component. So when the crisis is really real, they'll draw more anyway. But like you said, it's taking the pressure off the permanent fund to deliver. Oh, and by the way, the permanent fund is still spending almost $1 billion on all these fees and everything else. So everybody's still getting paid. So what does it matter if we don't deliver a great return or not, right?
Yeah, to some degree, the step down to 4.5% recognizes the impact of the permanent fund paying all those fees, paying $1 billion a year in fees, more than 1% in fees, and it sort of institutionalizes that approach by the Permanent Fund Corporation to be paying those fees, to have this sort of subpar, mediocre return going on. It says, okay, well, that's fine. We'll just step down the POMV draw. I think there's one other thing, and Rob has made this point before, maybe on the show, but if not separately, that what we're really doing is this is a backhanded way of wiping out the PFD. I mean, we usually think of the PFD being wiped out by increased spending, but what this is going to do, remember the PFD comes from the POMV draw. What this really does is step down the POMV draw in a way that will preserve the amount that's going to fund government, but sort of wipe out the marginal amount that's been used for the PFD. Now, the PFD shouldn't be calculated that way. The PFD, as it's set up in statute, is a preferred dividend. It's a dividend that's supposed to come before everything else. It's designated funds. But the way we've treated it the last 10 years is a common dividend, whatever common stock dividend, whatever's left over at the end. And by stepping down this revenue source, what you're essentially doing is undercutting the revenue that has supported the permanent fund. Right. Stedman and Lyman won't care about that, but that's another thing we're doing. And again, by institutionalizing that low return, that low POM, the low return from the Permanent Fund Corporation, you're essentially institutionalizing the wipeout of the PFD.
Well, and again, yeah, because that 0.5% that you're talking about is probably the majority of the PFD in and of itself, and maybe that's the intent in the long run, is a slow track down of the PFD when it's all said and done. So on the face, it looks like it may be good, but then when you start digging into it, you realize that this is just more political cover for the Permanent Fund Corporation to not do its job in the long run, while still getting paid, by the way. But we're still getting that $1 billion in nearly $1 billion in management fees and everything else. So, why can't we just get a permanent fund that ties itself to an S&P fund of some kind and really starts generating and just start paying? I mean, why can't we do that? Because we've got people who believe that they know better than we how to spend it.
Yeah, there was a slide in the Permanent Fund Corporation's presentation to both the House Finance and Senate Finance, where they asked themselves that question, because we've asked it enough that enough people are asking the question that they put it on the slide deck, and they said, well, why don't we just go to the S&P 500? And the slide said something along the lines of, well, we're not chasing headlines, we're chasing rock solid performance. Well, you're chasing deficient performance.
Yeah, you're chasing. I mean, you'll note that while chasing headlines, they're also getting some pretty decent returns compared to what you guys are doing. So maybe you should start chasing some headlines at that point. Wouldn't it be great to have a headline in the Wall Street Journal says Alaska Permanent Fund, reaches new stratospheric heights because it's, matching the S&P. I really don't care about the headlines, but I do care about the performance. Again, I think Rob kind of summates it well here, where, again, he's trying to say they're trying to protect the spend. This is all about everything that they're doing is about protecting the spend in the long run. And again, I would not be surprised, Brad, if what they're trying to do is a gentle, gradual phase out of the PFD, because again, that half a percentage point would essentially equate to almost all of the PFD draw at this point.
Yeah, but to give Bert credit in this small respect, they're not phasing it out in a way that preserves the revenue that formerly supported the PFD. They're not phasing it out in a way where that revenue goes to spending. By reducing the POMV rate down to 4.5%, they are essentially keeping that money in the fund as opposed to letting it leak out to spending. Of course, this is statutory, assuming they observe the statute and all that sort of stuff. But we need to give him that credit. But I think what's going on, I mean, I will characterize it this way. What they're saying to themselves is, look, Permanent Fund Corporation isn't going to get there. They're not going to get to 5%. So we got to phase it down. And it's okay that we phase it down because all we're really giving up is the PFD. And we don't really care. This is Bert and Lyman. We don't really care about the PFD anyway. So it's okay that we phase it, that we recognize the Permanent Fund Corporation. This is what the Permanent Fund Corporation is going to do. And it's okay that we're going to recognize it because we're not really taking that money out of spending. We're taking it out of the PFD, and the PFD is expendable in any event.
Yeah. Donna says, yes, Stedman wants the draw reduced so he can wipe out the PFD. That's thing. Charlie asks, so how would your proposal be worded if this was you running? What would you do differently in this case?
Well, Tangiman, I've got a commentary 4 weeks ago, I think, in the Landmine, and Tangiman had one in front of that, like the week before that essentially said it's the lower of 5% or whatever number you want, but lower of 5%, or what the actual rolling average return was over the 5 years you're using for the basis for the POMV draw. So it's a simple language, lower of. And so what that says is, look, if the Permanent Fund Corporation, and what that creates is the incentive for the legislature to say, look, Permanent Fund Corporation, you got to get up to 5%. You've got to maintain that 5%. You got ways to do it. And we're not going to reward you for letting it slide down to 4.5% because we can take that 5%. We can take it as a dividend, or we can take it however we want to. So it creates that incentive, that pressure, if you will, legislative pressure on the Permanent Fund Corporation to continue to maintain a 5%, which would require them to do something different than they've been doing because they haven't been maintaining the 5% over the last several periods.
Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. In other words, says Kim, the public knows the PFD is going away, so let's just accelerate it going away even more. I mean, again, I will be totally shocked and surprised if next year there really is any kind of PF. Now, I guess it all depends, and we're going to get into this in the next segment. It all depends on what happens with the Iran war, what happens with oil prices, what the legislators do here in the next few weeks with the proposed oil prices and everything else. But I think overall, I'm still sticking by the statement that I'll be totally surprised and shocked if we get a PFD next year.
Isn't that a horrible thing to say? Isn't that a horrible thing to admit? I mean, it's just, alas, we can't control our fiscal situation enough to give the citizens their share of the commonly owned wealth. We can't.
Right.
We the legislature, are going to give up trying to do that.
Yeah,
we failed, and we're just going to admit failure, and we're just going to wipe it out.
Yeah, no, it's but it is what it is, and I think, Brad, they don't even feel bad about it because, again, they know better than us how to spend this money. That's the disease. That's the disease.
Well, that's part of it, and part of it is they're all in the top 20%. After they gave themselves the raise, they're all in the top 20%. Yeah. So the PFD to them means very little.
Yeah, it's a nothing burger to them. To everyone else, it's something real. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, continues with us, his weekly discussion. We call it the weekly top three big topics that affect us each and every week here in the state. The second part, number 2, are the AKLNG's dynamics changing as a result of the Iraq war? Of course, we're seeing a lot of the headlines. Straits of Hormuz, Qatar has shut down its gas. I mean, Qatar produces 20% of the gas on the planet, and they've shut down their facilities. And, And, even if it's just for a month, the ripple effects of that are going to be amazing. And Glenfarne has said, hey, let's make hay while the sun shines. Brad, what's going on?
Yeah, we'll talk about oil prices in the third segment. This one's about LNG, and I've had more people than I would have thought send in questions or texts or calls and say, well, isn't the Iran war going to result in isn't that going to push the AK LNG project forward? Here's the response I've given to that, and I think is the correct one. If the Iran war, if as a result of the Iran war, Qatar's LNG making capacity was obliterated, if the LNG export facilities were targeted and wiped out, if the field in one of those fields they share jointly with Iran, if the fields were set a fire and the productive capacity of those fields were materially altered, then yes, I think there would be some knock-on consequence for other LNG projects. And the Alaska LNG project is somewhere in the stack in terms of costs and in terms of characteristics, is somewhere in the stack. And so if you wipe out 20% of the LNG production capacity in the world, you're going to, have to replace that with a different 20% someplace else, and Alaska might be caught in that stack. But that assumes that you wipe out Qatar's productive capacity and you set the fields ablaze, and you can't restore that productive capacity in any sort of timeline. If all that's going on, and it looks like this is all that's going on, everybody's sort of pulling their punches. Iran and the other countries are pulling their punches when it comes to fundamentally destroying the oil and gas productive capacity over there. If all that happens out of this is there is a time period during which Iran or Qatar is taken offline, and it takes a time for Qatar to come back, if that's all that's going to happen, no, there's not going to be any knock-on consequence. We're not going to have to replace 20% of the capacity of the LNG making capacity out there in the world in order to bring it on. Now, people might say, "Oh, but Alaska is safer, and all these other places are safer, and now we've known that Qatar is risky, and so we need to go to those safer places." That lasts for about 3 seconds because Qatar is cheap. The productive capacity in Qatar, the huge fields over there, very low cost to monetize those fields because of the scale. And so, yeah, okay, Qatar is risky, but we always knew that. We always knew Qatar was in the Middle East. We always knew that Qatar had to go through the Straits of Hormuz. We always knew that there was some potential out there at some point that Qatar could be taken offline. But it was people invested in it. People entered into contracts with them, knowing that risk was there. Okay, now we know there's a little more risk because we've seen it once. But if that risk is fairly constrained in time, price is going to overcome everything else. Alaska is much more costly than Qatar. People aren't going to go out and invest in Alaska if they know that Qatar is coming back. They're not going to go out and say, "Oh my, there's a risk premium somehow, and so we're going to invest in Alaska." And I mean, because when Qatar comes back, it's going to knock Alaska offline. It's going to knock all of those more expensive sources offline. So why are you going to go invest in a project in a country that's going to be more expensive? Why are you going to invest in it when it's going to get knocked offline from an economic standpoint, in a fairly short order? Right. The world's already seen this sort of condition on the LNG side. When Russia invaded Ukraine and the Europeans all decided to go off Russian pipeline gas, we've seen the price spikes that occur when you take a bunch of gas offline. I mean, Russia was providing more than 50% of the gas of Europe's gas at the time that the Ukraine war hit. And when Europe decided to go off Russian gas, take take the dollars away from Russia that were going to pay for the gas and ultimately going to pay for the Ukraine war. When Europe decided to take Russia offline and not use Russian gas anymore, prices spiked in Europe high, but they come down because the world found alternate sources to be able to accommodate that. I mean, Russia was taken offline permanently in the sense that Europe said, we're not going to buy any more of your gas. But the world found alternative sources of supply, particularly in the U.S. Gulf Coast, that brought those prices back down. So we've seen, price spikes before, and we've seen that they're temporary,
right?
As a result. So when people say, isn't Qatar going to, make the Alaska LNG project go? No, it's not. I mean, if the Alaska LNG project goes, it's going to be because, as we've talked before, the U.S. government and other governments decide that it's like it's a strategic asset from a war standpoint, and they'll be the ones investing in it.
Right, because again, the big challenge here is about timing and timelines, right? The Qatari may go offline for a period of time, and it may cause it to spike, but their ability to turn it back on and turn it back around in 60 days versus 3-4 years for Alaska gas to be able to actually make it to the export market. I mean, that's a pretty rapid timeline, 3 to 4 years, is part of the problem. And Bruce Tangeman, who's in the chat room today, says, and close to Tidewater, a $20 billion 800-mile pipe is Alaska's biggest hurdle. That's another plus on the side of the Qataris, is their stuff is right there at the water. So, yeah. So this is, it's all about timing and how long would it take to get it back up or on. So there is a little bit of a bright spot, but it's not the Hail Mary that everybody seems to think it is.
Yeah, and Michael, it's not a year. I mean, we're not looking at year time frames. So even if Qatar was going to be off a year, even if it was going to be off 2 years, it wouldn't really press Alaska forward, because Alaska is a 20, 30, 40-year payout. I mean, you're investing money in the expectation that you're going to pay it out and get your profit over 20, 30, 40 years. So it's not, I mean, and so you have to assume that Alaska stays online, stays economic, and is able to achieve those margins over that sort of time frame. So even if you were going to knock Qatar off a couple of years, you wouldn't automatically shift to Alaska. You would just take the price spike. You would hope that the Gulf Coast of the U.S. Gulf Coast steps up. There's a couple of U.S. Gulf Coast projects that have been mothballed because the economics aren't great for them. They might be resuscitated to come in and provide some additional supply. But you're talking about time frames. You're not talking about 6 months. If Qatar's off 6 months, oh my gosh, all of a sudden Alaska's going to go. Qatar would have to be off permanently. You'd have to be saying, okay, they've knocked out all of the liquefaction facilities. They've knocked out the port. They've torched all the fields. It's going to be nearly impossible to get those fields back up to the same productive capacity. Qatar's gone. You'd have to say that, and then you just have to say, okay, how are we going to fill this 20% hole in world demand as a result of Qatar being gone? You'd have to say that in order for the world to move on to the less economic projects that are sitting out there in line. And that's not how this war has gone, at least so far. As I said, nations seem to be pulling their punches. Yeah, they'll bomb the occasional refinery, or they'll bomb the occasional luxury hotel in Dubai, but they're not unlike what Saddam did in Kuwait at the end of the Kuwaiti War, where he torched all the fields. We're not seeing that sort of scorched earth policy adopted.
Right. And I know that you and I have been not negative. I mean, I like to say that I'm hopeful, but not optimistic about the AK LNG line. I'm hopeful that it could, if we find some way to make it happen. But again, I ain't counting those chickens until they're in the coop. And that's kind of where we're at right now. They're just, I don't see how financially we could make this work. I mean, they haven't even produced we still don't know what the final number is, right? The FID, we still don't know what the final investment number is. And apparently we're not going to know. It's supposed to be this month. They're supposed to do it, but we're not going to see it. So there's no way to really know what's going on with that.
Yeah, this is Jerry Maguire. This is show me the money, and I'll start believing in this project. But there's been no money. I mean, there's been no. We've had a bunch of contracts, heads of agreement announced. We've had a bunch of, potential orders for EPC for equipment for well, whatever the hell EPC stands for, construction. We've seen a bunch of preliminary contracts entered into for that, but we've not seen investment on the line, large scale investment to pay for all these contracts, to pay for all these things that we have preliminary agreements on. So, as the movie may be dated now, Jerry Maguire may be beyond whatever age class we've got listening to the program, but there was a line in that movie that said, "Show me the money, and then I'll believe." Right. And that's where we are with the AKLNG project.
Well,
and the money's not going to show up as a result of Qatar.
Right. And even as Brian says, as if Alaska doesn't have its own risk, and we didn't even get into this. I mean, Kathy Giesel and Company and Senate Resources now is putting together a bill that would basically politicize and to have the legislature take control of the whole thing at this point. I mean, if you think that they're inept and there's a lot of bickering and schoolyard tactics going on now, wait until they have control of the LNG project, right?
Yeah, this Giesel's bill reminds me a lot of what happened during the Palin administration with respect to the line to the lower 48. Remember, we were going to build a line from Alaska down to the gas line down to the lower 48 because the lower 48 was running out of gas. And the Palin administration came in, and I can't remember the acronym for that bill, but they had this bill that required bidding for the pipeline and all this sort of stuff, and had all sorts of tax provisions. And we had long debates about whether the state should take its gas in kind or take its royalty gas in kind or take it in value. We had this huge bill that came out, didn't do anything. I mean, we spent another X hundred millions of dollars with TransCanada because they got awarded the contract, and the state agreed to part of the contract was the state would pay TransCanada for what Egea, thank you. Whatever the TransCanada was doing, the state would pay for it. But it reminds me, Giesel's bill reminds me a lot of that process that the Palin administration went through. It's just, a lot of churning, a lot of, oh my gosh, we got to do it this way. We got to do it for a project that's never going to go.
Right. No, exactly. I mean, and if you want to scare off investors, nothing scares off investors faster than a government saying, oh, we'll take control of this and we'll make it easier. Nothing makes investors grab their pocketbooks faster than something like that. Yeah, this bill, when you get down into it, the Alaska story actually wrote two stories about this. One, it just kind of gives you the bare bone facts, and the other one basically just says, has Kathy Giesel lost her mind? Essentially is what the second story says, because that's in what happened to her. I mean, she used to be, well, I mean, this is the same chick that did the ad with her husband and his wallet on the table about stealing the PFD. And now she's like totally become one of the pod people. And now she's all about, look at all the stuff we could spend this money on if we need. I mean, what's going on down there, Brad, in your mind? You look at this, I mean, what triggered this where we need to take over everything and have legislative approval and the legislative budget and audit committee will oversee everything, and like that's ever worked out well?
Yeah, remember they hired these consultants? Remember that we went through this whole cycle where they hired the consultants that turned out to be a subsidiary of the EPC contractor for the project.
Yeah, right.
So we got these consultants, and consultants have to consult. And consultants have to, justify their existence by making recommendations. And we had a whole slide deck worth of recommendations that the consultants made about what the state should do to protect its interests. And it looks like, to some degree, I haven't gone back and compared slide bullet point X with section X of Giesel's bill, but it looks like the consultants' recommendations got turned into legislation, and so, hey, we had a project, we had consultants. The consultants advised us to do certain things, and we're supposed to do what the consultants tell us to do. So we've turned that into legislation. But it's all truly reminding me, and thank you to Rob for reminding me of what the acronym was. It's all reminding me. Alaska Gas Line Inducement Act. That's what it stood for. It's all reminding me of sort of late stage project. I mean, in what decade was that? Oh, it was the 2000s. That the producers had worked hard on coming to agreement with the Murkowski administration on exactly how they would govern the line to the lower 48 and the economics of the line to the lower 48. This is before the shale revolution and the gas revolution that came with the shale revolution. There was a period of time that the producers really believed that the Alaska Gas had a role to play in the lower 48, and they put together this project and they all agreed on it, and they worked with the Murkowski administration and they had an agreement on it. And then Murkowski flamed out. Palin came in and she had to change it all. She had consultants and she had to change it all. And in the meantime, the project just died. The economics behind the project died. And it was just sort of fun to watch all of this late stage, legislation and
it's fun
gyrations that went on.
It's fun to watch until you realize that it's, we're in the middle of it. That's the thing, it'd be it's one thing to watch. It's one thing to watch the train wreck from outside and be like, "Ooh, that's spectacular," and then realize, no, you're in car A when the thing comes off the rails, and that's a whole different way to look at it. And that's kind of how we've been here in Alaska. We're watching the train wreck, but we're on the train while it's happening, and that's the worst part. Is you just can't get away from it.
I've got to say, that bill really has, Giesel's bill has two big components in it. One is the first half of it is really how does the legislature control, or how does the state control the LNG project? And the second half of it is tax, how we tax gas and royalties and the like, and how we're going to set all that up. And, in my X number of years in Alaska, one thing I've learned is simplicity is important. Simplicity in tax is important. Simplicity in government regulation is important because the complexity of it will just wear you out and make you do other things. Even if it's well founded, just complexity itself will drive you away. And the last half of that bill, the tax sections, it's just one complexity after another. Yeah. I mean, all of it, I sit there and I go, okay, well, why would they do that? Okay, I understand what they're trying to incentivize. But it's like what SB 21 has turned into. It's one complexity on top of another complexity. And what that produces is an unpredictable result. I mean, what we've got with SB 21 now, I don't think anybody sitting there in 2013 and 2014 foresaw what stacking all these credits on top of themselves would do in terms of driving down the state's take. And it's the complexity itself that is undoing the benefits of SB 21. And that's what the tax provisions in Giesel's bill look like to me.
Well, exactly. And all you're doing is discouraging external investment in these kind of things, the more complexity. But again, it goes back to the syndrome of, we know better than you how to do this. We've got to show that we're taking care of it and we're taking charge and we're doing it. That's the problem with government in general, is that is their nature, to go ahead and take control of those things to show that they're doing something. And of course, by doing something, they're creating more hurdles to the market and everything else. And it's a hot mess. All right. The Michael Duke Show continues. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, the weekly top three. Number three, Brad, why should we ignore the spring revenue forecast? That's the, I mean, we could see it coming. We could see it. I mean, Gary Stevens's comment the other day, oh, this is really tragic and all this loss of life and destruction. But guess what? We're going to make a lot of money. It's great that we're going to make a lot of money. We can already see there's some problems here. Why should we be ignoring the spring revenue forecast?
The spring revenue forecast, the Department of Revenue spring revenue forecast, which is the basis on which the legislature finishes up the then current fiscal year, the supplementals for the then current fiscal year, and then the budget for the initial budget for the subsequent fiscal year. Spring revenue forecast is based upon the average price in the futures market over a 10-day period prior to the time that the spring revenue forecast is published. And we're currently in that 10-year period. We're currently in the period that
10-day period.
10-day period that the uh, uh, Department of Revenue is calculating this average for both 2006 and or 26. We're in 26, 2026, FY26 and FY27. AGIA, it always got me going back and forth between decades. But we're currently in the 10-year period. I keep on my desk one computer that's dedicated to oil matters, and I've got oil prices flashing up during the day, flashing up in front of me, and just from the start of the show, oil prices have gone from $94, which is where we were. Well, maybe that was like at 5:30 a.m. when I was getting up and getting everything set up. Oil prices have gone from $94 down to now $87 for the front month. For FY27, prices have gone from, we were about at $75 or so, $76. Now we're at $74. I mean, these prices are bouncing around all over the place.
Right.
And yes, mathematically, you can take the average from this 10-day slice and say that's the forecast that we're going to use. But it is as arbitrary and as unpredictable as anything can be when we're in the middle of a war that's affecting oil prices. So I think we're just setting ourselves up for huge problems. Maybe not with respect to FY26, maybe not with the end game of FY26, because we're only using the last 3 months of the futures of the fiscal year, the futures prices for the last 3 months to sort of figure out what the FY26 average price is going to be, and maybe right. That makes some sense. But to use the futures price for FY27 to set the budget up based upon whatever the heck those 12 months, the futures price in those 12 months are during this 10-day slice, it's just setting us up for all sorts of problems.
Yeah. Well, listen, this we've always talked about that the problem with the budgeting process is that we are always betting on the if come. We're always betting on some kind of future amorphous thing that's really nothing more than a best guess. And even in times like this, you'd think that the Department of Revenue would say, well, we usually do it in this time frame, but there's a war on, and that's a really extraneous kind of thing, and that's going to really blow these numbers apart, and they're not going to be true and accurate. But no, they're going to do, this has been part of our problem the whole time. Why aren't we betting it on an average of the revenue from the previous 5 years? Why aren't we using some kind of weighting to go, this doesn't make any sense?
Yeah, I mean, there's a sort of a usefulness to revenue doing this. I mean, you sort of want to have, I mean, you want to look at 10-year forecasts, you want to look at 5-year forecasts, you want to sort of see where you're heading. And the best way to do that is the futures market. And there's, you got to do it at some point. So it's not a bad thing to do. The problem is budgeting on it. The problem is saying, this is the revenue we're going to have and we're going to depend on in setting up the budget. And it's just, I mean, it's wild that we do it even during normal times, because even during normal times, there can be stray events that cause those prices to get way out of whack.
Right.
We know right now that we're not in normal times. So I understand. I'm not arguing that DOR shouldn't do it, because there's a usefulness to having that projection, but it shouldn't be the basis on which we budget.
Right.
We should, if we're ever going to do it, now's the time to go to what other states do, what Oklahoma and New Mexico do. I wrote a column, last Friday's column in the Landmines, all about this for those who want to dig into it. What other states do, which is to use either averages or to use some mechanism that normalizes oil prices based upon historical levels, and then shoves the rest of it into some sequester account that you then can use when oil prices are below that level.
it's not like this is happening in a vacuum either. We can just go back to look at Parnell's administration when they used an oil projection of $105 a barrel. By the time he got to doing the budget, it was down to 70, and he's still factoring it $105 a barrel, right? This is not like it hasn't happened before. We haven't seen the danger of this. That's what started this whole merry-go-round off by drawing out of the CBR and those $3 billion draws to pay for this kind of stuff because of this kind of factoring. We got 2 minutes here, Brad.
Well, no, we absolutely so we know that we're going into a screwy period. We know that these prices are going to come from a screwy period, and we know that they are unlikely to reflect where we're going to be over the course of fiscal year 2027. We know that. And so we ought to take that knowledge and apply that in how we budget going forward. And the best thing we can do is to go to historical averages. I mean, that's what Oklahoma does. It's what New Mexico does. It's what Wyoming, North Dakota. I mean, you look around the rest of the U.S., nobody is doing it like we're doing it. You look around the rest of the globe, nobody does it the way we do it. Nobody predicates their budgets on the projection of oil prices. So we ought to step back. Since we know that we're going to be off using these numbers, we ought to step back and use a budgeting process that's tried and true and been used in other states and other places around the globe.
Bruce Tangeman he almost gets the final word today. The legislature will most likely ignore the DOR report and come up with their own number based on 1, their fiscal year 27 budget, and 2, $1,000 PFD, and then back into an oil price to make it all balance. That's sad. That's just kind of where we're at right now. Final thoughts, Brad, 1 minute.
Well, that explains why Alaska is where it is.
I mean, we're not exactly.
We're not using, and Bruce was a legislative staffer at one point to finance. We're not using tried and true budgeting practices. We're using made up, spur of the moment rationalizations of how we want to get to our budget. We're not using a process that produces a good, solid outcome. We're just making it up as we go along.
No, we know better than how the system works. We know better than all these other people. We'll figure it out. We're going to make up our own stuff, and it'll all work out just fine. Rob just said, we've been told that Senate Finance will use $68 oil this year. I mean, if that turns out to be okay, then that's great. That's great. I mean, they're playing it safe, which is all good. But the problem is that's this year. We need to stop this back and forth every year and start looking at it from a long-term perspective where the legislators can't. You're right. Okay, so they could have decided to do 68 this year, but they could have decided to do 88 this year. Right,
or
Brad?
72, or 72, or 70, or 75.5, or
pick a number. Yeah, I mean, they politicized the whole process. There's no grounding in reality. It's just whatever the hell they feel like it, and that's the problem that we're talking about, right, Brad?
Yes. I've never heard a Senate finance hearing, or a House finance hearing, or even an administration talk about how it's done in other states. Talk about how other states who are confronted with the same issues we are in terms of having this volatile commodity producing a material part of their revenue stream. I've never heard a hearing that sort of goes through what others do and sort of tries to develop best practice for Alaska. It's always and it's out there. I mean, I tried to do it in the Friday column to a degree. There's stuff out there that people have thought through and applied, basic fundamental financial policy in trying to public finance policy and trying to develop these mechanisms that work and become tried and true and predictable and understandable and simple and that sort of stuff. We don't do that in Alaska. We just sort of make it up as we go along. 68 today, 65 tomorrow. It's just. I mean,
right. Well,
and we wonder why we run into these issues that we're running into. We wonder why we can't observe the permanent fund dividend, the preferred nature of the designated nature of the permanent fund dividend. It's because we're just making this shit up as we go along. Yeah. And we run ourselves into these dead ends where, the only thing we can do is sort of steal money from somebody else.
Well, and Brad, this is indicative of Alaska's legislature and the leadership overall. It's not just with oil and gas. I mean, look at the Alaska Reads Act. I mean, it worked in Mississippi, and it took us 6 years to finally force a bill through to show that, because we knew that it worked. We saw that it worked. If they've looked at other states, but see, then they wouldn't be able to ones to say, look at what we did. We knew exactly how much better we were than anybody else to do it. It's that whole idea of we know better. I mean, it really truly is a sickness, in my opinion.
It is, and it, at least on the economic side, it's we know better, but we aren't subject to the same. We know better. We're going to apply our experience and our understanding, and we're going to come up with the way it works. But the legislators have insulated themselves through the raises and the other things that they do for themselves, have insulated themselves from what affects the bulk of Alaskans, what affects 80% of Alaska families. So they're operating on on their experience level, the impact on them that doesn't reflect the way it impacts ordinary Alaskans. And and we get stuff like out-migration. My God, why do we have out-migration? Oh, it must be because the government hasn't spent enough money in this area or that area. No, it's because we're taking money out of the pockets of those Alaskans, of middle and lower income Alaskans that are leaving the state. We're taking money. We're affecting their economics. Oh, no, but it's because we don't have childcare for them, or we don't have this, or we don't have that. It's Julie Colomb. I mean, it's because we have to have childcare. That will solve out migration. No, it won't. But that's her experience, and she doesn't have the experience of paychecks. I mean, day-to-day living on day-to-day income and looking at the PFD as a part of her income.
No, you're 100% right. And unfortunately, I mean, I don't know how to fix all that. I don't know how to fix this mindset in the legislature that instead of taking a blueprint from somebody else who's done something similar and modifying it and using it for ourselves and saying, hey, look, that's a great idea. Let's steal that and make it our own. It is, let's build it from the ground up, from scratch, and completely ignore anybody else who's ever done anything else, because we know better than anybody else how to make this happen. I mean, that's the madness that we're facing in this situation.
And I don't know. Maybe we never get out of this. Maybe through a combination of eliminating campaign finance limits and giving them enough salary that they don't have to worry about ordinary common stuff. Maybe we've set ourselves up where where our legislature never reflects what is in the best interest of the bulk of Alaskans.
It's Stedmanomics. That's what Colleen Sullivan Leonard said. Yeah, I mean, these guys are convinced that they're the smartest people in the room and that nobody else could have possibly done it better than they have. And so they're going to do it. All right, Brad, final thoughts here, last minute. Final thoughts on where we're going and what happens this legislative session.
I think the most important thing, if anybody's listening on this, I think the most important thing this session is don't go by the 10-year, the Department of Revenue's spring forecast. Go by historical average. 68 is probably close to the historical average right now. 10-year average, 10-year moving average. So I wouldn't get hugely upset about that. But there's going to be pressures to spend more. Shit, we're seeing a school bill out there, right? I mean,
right.
Increase the BSA. There's going to be pressures to increase spending. Don't use the spring forecast.
Yeah, another 160 million, which would mean we would spend over a third of $1 billion increase in 2 years on schools, and forever, in perpetuity, until we're done. It's dude, it's madness. It's just total madness. All right, Brad Keithley, thank you so much, my friend. As always, it's great to talk with you. We will catch you next week, okay?
Michael, thanks as always for having me.
All right, we appreciate you.
Well, that's a wrap for another week's edition of the Weekly Top 3 from Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Thank you again for joining us. Remember that you can find past episodes on our YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, and Substack pages, and keep track of us during the week on Facebook and Twitter. This has been Brad Keithley, Managing Director of Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. We look forward to you joining us again next week for the next edition of the Weekly Top 3.